Hello there, and welcome to Before Law, where we step quietly into thoughts that stretch beyond the ordinary and let wonder unfold at its own pace. Tonight, I want to share with you an idea that might sound like something pulled from science fiction, but the more you sit with it, the more it begins to feel strangely plausible. What if our entire planet, with all its complexity and beauty and chaos, isn't simply the result of cosmic accident? What if Earth is something far more deliberate, something designed with intention and purpose? Picture this for a moment. Imagine that somewhere out there, beings of unimaginable intelligence look upon our world not as a home that happened to form under perfect conditions, but as a carefully constructed laboratory. A testing ground where life itself becomes the subject of the grandest experiment ever conceived. Every mountain range, every ocean current, every delicate balance that allows us to breathe and thrive, all of it arranged with the precision of a scientist preparing their most important study. Before we venture deeper into this possibility, let me ask you something small but grounding. Where are you right now as these words reach you? Are you settling into the quiet hours of evening, perhaps letting your mind wander as the day releases its hold? Are you in a place where the world feels still and contemplative, or somewhere bustling where thoughts compete with the noise around you? Whatever your setting, take a moment to notice it. The temperature against your skin, the quality of light, the subtle sounds that form the backdrop of this instant. Now consider this. What if even this moment, this very second of your existence, was always meant to be observed? Not in a way that feels invasive or uncomfortable, but as part of something larger, something that gives weight and meaning to every breath you take. The thought can feel overwhelming at first, this idea that we might be participants in some cosmic study. But there's also something deeply comforting about it, isn't there? Because if Earth truly is a test field, then nothing here is meaningless. Every struggle has purpose. Every joy carries significance. Every choice you make ripples through the fabric of an experiment that spans billions of years. Think about the sheer improbability of our existence. Our planet sits in what scientists call the habitable zone, that narrow band around our star where temperatures allow liquid water to exist. Not too close, where everything would boil away into space. Not too far, where everything would freeze into lifeless ice. We have an atmosphere that's thick enough to trap heat, but not so dense that it suffocates us. We have a magnetic field that shields us from deadly radiation. We have plate tectonics that recycle nutrients and maintain chemical balance. Each of these features is rare on its own. The chances of them all aligning on a single world should be vanishingly small. Yet here we are, breathing easily on a planet that seems almost suspiciously well suited for life. You could call it luck, certainly. You could point to the vastness of the universe and say that with enough planets, even the most unlikely combinations must occur somewhere. But what if there's another explanation? What if the conditions weren't left to chance at all? Consider how life on Earth has unfolded. It didn't simply appear once and remain static. Instead, it has transformed, adapted, and grown more complex across vast stretches of time. Single cells became multicellular organisms. Sea creatures developed the ability to breathe air and walk on land. Reptiles gave way to mammals. Primates developed the capacity for abstract thought and language. Each transition looks like a step in an ongoing process, as if life were being guided through a series of increasingly sophisticated trials. And then there are the resets. More than 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct. At first glance, this seems like waste, like cosmic cruelty. But look at it from another angle. Each mass extinction cleared the stage for new forms of life to emerge and flourish. When the dinosaurs vanished 65 million years ago, mammals suddenly had room to diversify and grow. When earlier catastrophes wiped out dominant species, entirely new evolutionary pathways opened up. These aren't random disasters. They follow patterns, occurring at intervals that seem almost rhythmic when viewed across geological time. It's as if someone periodically adjusts the conditions of the experiment, clearing away one set of results to see what emerges next. Not out of malice, but out of scientific curiosity. What happens when you remove the dominant players? What new forms of complexity arise from chaos? We humans represent the newest phase of this grand trial. We're the first species on Earth to develop not just intelligence, but self-awareness. We ask questions about our own existence. We wonder about our place in the universe. We create art and music and stories. We build technologies that reshape our environment. We even ponder whether we might be part of some larger design. Perhaps this capacity for reflection is exactly what the experiment was designed to produce. Maybe the test has been building toward creatures who can not only survive and adapt, but who can contemplate the nature of survival itself. Beings who can look up at the stars and ask whether anyone is looking back. If Earth is indeed a test field, then we are both the subjects and the observers of the experiment. We experience life from the inside, feeling every joy and sorrow as immediate and personal. But we also have the unique ability to step back and examine patterns, to see ourselves as part of something larger. This dual perspective might be the most remarkable feature of human consciousness, and perhaps the very quality that makes us worthy of study. The implications of this idea ripple outward in fascinating directions. If we're being tested, then every aspect of human experience takes on new significance. Our struggles with morality, our attempts to build just societies, our capacity for both cooperation and conflict, all of it becomes data in an experiment whose scope we can barely imagine. War and peace, creation and destruction, love and hatred. These aren't just random features of human nature. They're variables being measured, responses being catalogued, outcomes being analyzed by intelligences far beyond our current understanding. Every civilization that has risen and fallen throughout history might represent a single trial run, one iteration in a vast series of experiments designed to explore the possibilities of conscious life. But who could be conducting such a test? The scale required is staggering. We're talking about an experiment that spans not just centuries or millennia, but millions and billions of years. What kind of beings could have the patience, the technology, and the perspective necessary to set up and monitor such a project? One possibility that immediately comes to mind involves extraterrestrial intelligence. Civilizations that evolved millions or billions of years before us might have developed technologies we can scarcely imagine. To them, seeding a planet with the basic ingredients of life and then watching it develop might be no more difficult than we find it to grow bacteria in a petri dish. These cosmic gardeners wouldn't need to hover in spaceships or make dramatic appearances. Their methods might be so subtle, so thoroughly integrated into what we perceive as natural processes, that we would never recognize their influence. An asteroid impact here, a climate shift there, a genetic mutation at just the right moment. All of it could be guidance disguised as chance. But aliens aren't the only possible explanation. Another intriguing possibility is that the observers are us, or rather, future versions of ourselves. Humanity, 1,000 or 10,000 years from now, might have developed the ability to simulate entire histories in perfect detail. What we experience as reality could be an incredibly sophisticated recreation, designed by our descendants to understand their own origins. In this scenario, every moment of joy and suffering, every triumph and tragedy, serves a purpose in helping future humans comprehend the journey that led to their existence. We would be both the ancestors they're studying and the subjects of their research, living out the story of humanity's development for the education and enlightenment of those who come after us. There's also the possibility that the intelligence behind the test field operates on a scale we can barely conceptualize. Not aliens as we imagine them, not future humans, but something that exists at a higher level of reality entirely, Cosmic architects whose canvas is space and time itself, whose tools are the fundamental forces of physics, whose medium is the slow unfolding of billions of years. To such beings, creating and monitoring a test like Earth might require no more effort than it takes us to run a computer simulation. They would set the initial conditions, adjust the parameters occasionally, and observe the results with the patience that comes from existing on timescales that dwarf our comprehension. The silence of the universe, the fact that we've detected no obvious signals from other civilizations, might make perfect sense from this perspective. If Earth is a controlled experiment, then contact with other test subjects would contaminate the results. The observers would maintain strict protocols to ensure that each trial runs independently, without outside interference. This brings us to one of the most profound questions raised by the test field hypothesis. If we are indeed being studied, monitored, and perhaps guided, then what does that mean for human free will? Are we truly making choices, or are we simply following pathways laid out for us by the architects of the experiment? The question of free will in a test field scenario isn't as simple as it might first appear. Consider how a scientist designs an experiment. They don't control every variable, they establish conditions and then observe what unfolds naturally within those boundaries. The walls of the maze are fixed, but the path through it remains open to choice. Perhaps our situation is similar. The fundamental laws of physics, the need for food and water and shelter, the inevitability of aging and death, these might be the unchangeable parameters of the test. But within those constraints, an enormous range of possibilities exists. We choose what to create, how to treat one another, what values to embrace, what stories to tell. These choices, made freely within the boundaries want to see. Think of the experiment. Might be exactly what the observers about your own life for a moment. How many decisions have you made today, this week, this year? Small ones and large ones, mundane ones and profound ones. Each choice reveals something about who you are, what you value, how you respond to circumstances. If Earth is indeed a test field, then these personal decisions aren't insignificant details. They're the very substance of what's being studied. The beauty of this perspective is that it doesn't diminish human agency. Instead, it amplifies its importance. Every act of kindness becomes a data point about compassion. Every creative breakthrough becomes evidence of innovation under pressure. Every moral stand taken in difficult circumstances becomes a measurement of conscience. We aren't puppets dancing to invisible strings. We're conscious beings whose choices matter precisely because they're genuine expressions of our nature. But what exactly is being measured in this grand experiment? If we accept the premise that Earth serves as some kind of testing ground, we must ask what qualities or outcomes the observers might be seeking. The answer probably isn't simple survival. Cockroaches and bacteria have already mastered that particular challenge. Instead, the test might focus on more complex phenomena that emerge only in intelligent, self-aware species. One possibility is resilience, not just the ability to endure hardship, but to grow stronger through it. Human history is filled with examples of individuals and societies that faced seemingly insurmountable challenges and not only survived, but transformed themselves in the process. The Black Death led to social and economic changes that ultimately improved life for many. The devastation of World War II spurred technological advances and international cooperation. Personal tragedies often become the catalyst for profound growth and wisdom. If the observers are studying resilience, they would want to see how conscious beings respond when everything seems to be falling apart. Do they collapse into despair and give up? Do they turn on each other in desperate competition? Or do they find ways to support one another, to rebuild, to create something better from the ashes of what was lost? Another quality being tested might be cooperation. Despite our reputation for conflict, humans are remarkably social creatures. We form families, communities, nations, and increasingly, global networks of connection and collaboration. We create systems of law and governance that, however imperfectly, attempt to balance individual needs with collective good. We develop technologies that benefit not just their inventors but entire populations. The test might be examining whether intelligent beings can overcome their basic survival instincts to work together on larger and larger scales. Can they move beyond tribal loyalty to embrace universal compassion? Can they solve problems that affect their entire species? Can they eventually learn to see themselves as part of something even greater than their own kind? Then there's creativity, perhaps the most distinctly human trait of all. We don't just survive in our environment, we transform it. We build cities and compose symphonies and write poetry and paint pictures. We tell stories that help us make sense of existence. We imagine possibilities that don't yet exist and then work to bring them into reality. This creative impulse seems to serve no obvious evolutionary purpose. Art doesn't help us find food or avoid predators. Music doesn't make us stronger or faster. Literature doesn't improve our immune systems. Yet these activities feel essential to human nature. They emerge spontaneously in every culture, regardless of practical circumstances. If Earth is a test field, perhaps creativity is one of the key variables being observed. The observers might be fascinated by beings who not only adapt to their environment but actively reshape it according to their imagination. They might want to see how far this creative drive can extend, whether it leads to greater beauty and meaning, or ultimately to self-destruction through unchecked ambition. Morality presents another compelling focus for the experiment. Humans possess an unusual capacity for ethical reasoning. We can consider the consequences of our actions, not just for ourselves, but for others, including people we've never met and future generations will never see. We develop concepts like justice, fairness, and rights that sometimes require us to act against our immediate self-interest. This moral sense creates fascinating tensions and dilemmas. We struggle with questions that have no clear answers. How do we balance individual freedom with collective responsibility? How do we distribute limited resources fairly? How do we respond to those who harm others? How do we weigh present needs against future consequences? If the test field is examining moral development, the observers might be particularly interested in these moments of ethical complexity. They would want to see how conscious beings navigate situations where there's no obvious right answer, where competing values create genuine dilemmas that require wisdom and judgment to resolve. The experimental design would need to present regular moral challenges to the test subjects. Natural disasters that require communities to decide how to allocate aid. Technological advances that create new ethical questions. Cultural encounters that force different value systems to interact. Scarcity that tests whether beings will share resources or hoard them. Abundance that reveals whether prosperity leads to generosity or complacency. Perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that the test focuses on consciousness itself. We are, as far as we know, the only creatures on Earth that experience what philosophers call subjective awareness. We don't just respond to stimuli, we know that we're responding. We don't just exist, we know that we exist. This self-awareness opens up entirely new dimensions of experience that seem to serve no practical evolutionary function. We contemplate our own mortality and create meaning in the face of it. We wonder about our place in the universe and search for purpose beyond mere survival. We experience emotions like awe, wonder, and transcendence that connect us to something larger than ourselves. We ask questions about the nature of reality, the possibility of other forms of consciousness, and the ultimate meaning of existence. If the observers are studying consciousness, they would be fascinated by these uniquely subjective experiences. They would want to see how self-aware beings cope with the knowledge of their own limitations and mortality. They would observe how consciousness expresses itself through art, philosophy, religion, and science. They would note how the awareness of being aware changes behavior and creates new forms of complexity. The test might be designed to push consciousness to its limits, to see how far self-awareness can develop and what new capabilities might emerge. Perhaps the ultimate goal is to determine whether conscious beings can transcend their original programming, evolve beyond their biological constraints, and become something entirely new. This brings us to a sobering consideration. If Earth truly is a test field, then the experiment includes not just our triumphs, but our failures as well. War, genocide, environmental destruction, inequality. These aren't unfortunate side effects of an otherwise successful trial. They're integral parts of the data being collected. The observers wouldn't intervene to prevent human suffering any more than a biologist would reach into a petri dish to save individual bacteria. The pain and loss that feel so immediate and devastating to us might appear to them as necessary elements of the experimental process, not because they're cruel, but because interference would compromise the validity of their results. This perspective doesn't make suffering meaningless, but it does reframe it. Instead of seeing tragedy as evidence that the universe is indifferent or malevolent, we might understand it as part of a larger pattern that serves purposes we can't fully grasp. The test requires authentic responses to genuine challenges. It needs to observe how conscious beings behave under real pressure, with real stakes and real consequences. The observers might be particularly interested in how we respond to seemingly senseless suffering. Do we lose faith in meaning and purpose? Do we become bitter and cruel? Or do we find ways to create compassion and hope, even in the darkest circumstances? Do we use our pain to better understand the pain of others? Do we channel our grief into efforts to prevent similar losses? In this light, every human response to difficulty becomes significant. Every choice to help rather than harm, to build rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair, contributes to the understanding of what conscious beings are capable of achieving. We aren't just surviving the test, we're defining what it means to be consciously alive in a complex and often challenging universe. The implications stretch beyond individual choices to encompass our entire species' trajectory. If we're approaching some kind of final examination, as many of our current global challenges suggest, then the way we handle these tests will determine not just our survival, but our graduation to whatever comes next. Whether we prove worthy of contact with other conscious beings, whether we earn the right to continue the experiment, whether we demonstrate the kind of consciousness that deserves to persist and flourish across cosmic time. The test field hypothesis transforms every aspect of human existence into something profound and purposeful. It suggests that we're not accidents floating in an indifferent void, but conscious participants in the grandest experiment ever conceived. Every breath we take, every choice we make, every moment of awareness we experience contributes to an understanding of what it means to be alive, aware, and capable of growth in an infinite universe full of possibilities we've only begun to imagine. But if we step back from the immediate implications of being test subjects and consider the broader mechanics of such an experiment, we encounter questions that stretch the boundaries of imagination itself. How would such a test actually function? What would be the methodology behind an experiment of this magnitude? The logistics alone boggle the mind when you consider the precision required to maintain stable conditions across billions of years while still allowing for meaningful variation and change. Think about the delicate calibration involved in keeping a planet habitable for such vast stretches of time. Our sun burns at exactly the right temperature, neither too hot nor too cold. Our moon sits at precisely the correct distance to create tides that may have been crucial for early life's transition from sea to land. Our planet's axial tilt gives us seasons that prevent extreme temperature variations from making life impossible. The magnetic field that protects us from solar radiation maintains just the right strength. Each of these factors operates within incredibly narrow parameters. Shift any one of them slightly, and the entire experiment collapses. The sun burns a little hotter, and Earth becomes Venus, a little cooler, and we become Mars. The moon drifts too far away, and tidal forces disappear. Too close, and catastrophic tidal waves reshape the continents daily. It's as if someone carefully adjusted thousands of cosmic dials to create the perfect laboratory conditions. But maintenance isn't the only consideration. The experiment also requires intervention at crucial moments. Consider the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. From our perspective, it was a random catastrophe. But what if it was a precisely timed reset, clearing the stage exactly when mammalian evolution needed room to flourish? The timing seems almost suspiciously perfect. Dinosaurs had dominated for over 150 million years, growing increasingly specialized, but perhaps reaching an evolutionary dead end. Mammals existed, but remained small, nocturnal creatures living in the shadows of giants. Then came the impact. Not just any asteroid, but one of exactly the right size, hitting at exactly the right angle, in exactly the right location to cause maximum disruption without sterilizing the planet entirely. Too small, and dinosaurs would have recovered. Too large, and nothing would have survived. The precision required to engineer such an event suggests planning rather than accident. The same pattern appears throughout Earth's history. The great oxygenation event that poisoned most early life forms, but made complex organisms possible. The snowball Earth episodes that nearly froze the planet solid, but may have driven evolutionary innovation. The volcanic episodes that reshaped continents and altered climate patterns. Each crisis arrives at a moment when life seems ready for its next major transition. If these are indeed planned interventions, rather than cosmic coincidences, then the experiment operates on multiple timescales simultaneously. There are the long, slow changes that unfold over millions of years, the gradual drift of continents, the evolution of new species, the accumulation of atmospheric gases. But there are also sudden, dramatic shifts that redirect the entire course of planetary development in geological instants. The observers would need to monitor countless variables continuously. Temperature fluctuations, chemical compositions, evolutionary rates, extinction patterns, the emergence and disappearance of different life forms. They would track not just physical changes, but behavioral ones too. The development of tool use, the emergence of language, the formation of social structures, the creation of art and religion and science. Modern humans would represent a particularly intensive phase of observation. Never before has a single species so rapidly and dramatically altered planetary conditions. In just a few thousand years, we've gone from small bands of hunter-gatherers to a global civilization capable of splitting atoms and reaching other worlds. We've changed the composition of the atmosphere, redirected rivers, flattened mountains, and created new forms of matter that don't exist anywhere else in nature. This acceleration might signal that the experiment is entering its final stages. Perhaps the observers have been waiting to see whether intelligence, when it finally emerges, can learn to manage its own power responsibly. The current moment in human history, with all its promise and peril, could represent the climax of a test that has been building for billions of years. But who has the capability to orchestrate something so vast and complex? The scale required exceeds anything we can currently imagine. We're talking about intelligences that can manipulate planetary systems, redirect asteroids, influence evolutionary processes, and maintain stable observation across geological time periods. Such beings would need to operate on levels of technology and organization that make our greatest achievements look like children playing with blocks. Yet perhaps that's exactly the point. Maybe the gap between us and our observers is similar to the gap between us and the bacteria in our laboratories. We study microorganisms, manipulate their environments, introduce various stresses and stimuli, and observe their responses. The bacteria have no awareness of our existence or our purposes. From their perspective, The changes in their environment might seem random, natural, or perhaps guided by forces they can't comprehend. Similarly, we might be biological entities so far below our observers in complexity and capability that we can barely conceive of their nature. They might be to us what we are to single-celled organisms, conscious beings operating on such different scales of space and time that our entire species' history represents just a brief moment in their attention. This perspective helps explain why the universe seems so eerily silent. We search for radio signals, look for signs of other civilizations, send messages into space hoping for replies. But if Earth is an isolated test environment, then contact with other experimental subjects would contaminate the results. The observers would maintain strict protocols to ensure that each trial runs independently, without outside interference or knowledge that might influence outcomes. The silence isn't evidence of our cosmic loneliness. It's evidence of experimental control. We're meant to develop independently, to make choices based on our own understanding and values, rather than being influenced by knowledge of how other civilizations have addressed similar challenges. Only by maintaining isolation can the observers gather meaningful data about how intelligence develops and expresses itself under specific conditions. This isolation also extends to our relationship with the observers themselves. They can't reveal their presence without fundamentally altering the nature of what they're studying. The moment we become aware that we're being tested, we start behaving differently. We become self-conscious about our choices, second-guessing our natural responses, trying to figure out what the right answers might be, rather than responding authentically to the situations we encounter. It's like the observer effect in physics, where the act of measurement changes the thing being measured. Conscious beings who know they're being studied become actors rather than authentic subjects. They perform rather than simply exist. The observers need to see how we behave when we believe our choices matter only to ourselves and our immediate communities, not to cosmic intelligences evaluating our worthiness. But this raises troubling questions about the ethics of such an experiment. If we're truly conscious beings capable of suffering, joy, love, and hope, then using us as test subjects without our knowledge or consent seems morally problematic. We form deep emotional attachments, experience genuine grief when we lose those we love, struggle with existential questions about meaning and purpose. Are these experiences meaningful to us alone, or do they serve some greater purpose in the experimental design? Perhaps the observers face their own ethical dilemmas about how to conduct such research. They might have established guidelines about minimizing unnecessary suffering while still maintaining experimental validity. The various support systems built into human nature, our capacity for resilience, our tendency to find meaning in adversity, our ability to form supportive communities. These might represent safeguards designed to ensure that the test subjects can endure the challenges without being destroyed by them. Or perhaps ethics, as we understand them, simply don't apply to beings operating on such vast scales. A cosmic intelligence might view individual human lives the way we view individual cells in our bodies. Each cell lives and dies, experiences its own microscopic version of existence, but serves the larger organism without our conscious awareness or concern for its individual welfare. The suffering of one cell or even millions of cells doesn't register as morally significant compared to the health and function of the whole. This possibility forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of consciousness and moral value. If we're part of some larger cosmic organism, then perhaps our individual experiences, however meaningful they feel to us, are simply components in a greater pattern of awareness that we can't perceive or comprehend. Our joys and sorrows, our loves and losses, our creative achievements and moral struggles. All of it might be like neurons firing in a vast cosmic brain that uses our experiences to think thoughts too large for any individual mind to contain. Yet even if that's true, it doesn't diminish the reality of our experiences from our own perspective. The love we feel for our families and friends remains genuine. The beauty we find in art and nature continues to move us. The moral choices we make still reflect our deepest values and commitments. Whether or not our lives serve some greater experimental purpose, they possess inherent meaning and worth from our point of view. In fact, the test field hypothesis might actually enhance rather than diminish the significance of human experience. If our choices and behaviors are being studied by intelligences vastly superior to our own, then every decision we make carries cosmic weight. Every act of kindness contributes to an understanding of compassion that spans the universe. Every creative breakthrough adds to a gallery of conscious achievement that transcends planetary boundaries. Every moral stand taken in difficult circumstances provides might-be test subjects, but we're test subjects whose responses help answer some of the most fundamental data about the nature of conscience itself. Questions about consciousness, morality, creativity, and the potential for growth that exists within intelligent life. Our struggles and triumphs don't just matter to us and our immediate communities. They matter to the very forces that shape the cosmos itself. Intelligences seeking to understand what conscious beings are capable of becoming when given the right conditions and sufficient time. This perspective transforms even our darkest moments into something meaningful. The genocides and wars that scar human history, the environmental destruction that threatens our future, the inequality and injustice that plague our societies. These aren't just tragedies to be endured. They're tests of our character, measurements of our capacity to learn from our mistakes and choose better paths forward. The observers might be particularly interested in how we respond to our own failures. Do we repeat the same destructive patterns generation after generation? Do we learn from history and develop better systems of governance and cooperation? Do we find ways to channel our competitive instincts into constructive rather than destructive activities? Do we evolve morally as well as technologically? Each generation faces these questions anew. Each civilization must decide whether to repeat the mistakes of its predecessors or chart new courses toward more sustainable and equitable ways of living. The choices we make collectively as a species might determine not just our survival, but our graduation to whatever comes next in the experimental sequence. If we're approaching some kind of final examination, then the current moment in human history takes on extraordinary significance. We stand at the threshold of capabilities that could either elevate us to unprecedented heights or destroy us entirely. We can manipulate genetic codes, split atoms, communicate instantly across vast distances, and even begin to venture beyond our home planet. We've also created weapons that could end civilization, altered our climate in potentially catastrophic ways, and developed technologies that might replace us entirely. The observers would be watching these developments with intense interest. This might be the culmination of everything they've been waiting to see. The moment when intelligence finally faces the ultimate test of its wisdom and maturity. Can conscious beings learn to wield godlike powers responsibly? Can they transcend their evolutionary programming to become something greater than the sum of their biological inheritance? The answer to these questions will likely emerge within the next few centuries, perhaps even within our own lifetimes. We're living through what might be the most closely observed period in the entire history of the experiment, the decisive moment when billions of years of preparation finally reveal their ultimate purpose and meaning. The weight of this possibility settles differently once you truly absorb what it might mean. If we are indeed living through the climactic moments of an experiment that spans geological ages, then every headline we read, every choice our leaders make, every small decision in our own lives carries implications that ripple far beyond what we can see. The observers, if they exist, aren't just watching anymore. They're leaning forward, taking notes, measuring responses with an intensity that matches the magnitude of what's unfolding. Consider the peculiar nature of our current predicament. Never before in Earth's history has a single species possessed such power over the entire planetary system. We've become a geological force unto ourselves, capable of triggering the sixth mass extinction, altering the chemistry of oceans and atmosphere, even potentially rendering our world uninhabitable. Yet alongside this destructive capability, we've developed unprecedented tools for understanding and potentially healing the damage we've caused. It's as if the experiment has reached a carefully orchestrated crescendo. The test subjects have been given enough rope to either hang themselves or weave something beautiful. The outcome remains genuinely uncertain, which might be precisely what makes this moment so valuable to whoever is watching. They're observing intelligence at its most critical juncture, the point where it either learns to transcend its limitations or succumbs to them. Think about the strange timing of our technological awakening. For most of human history, we lived in small groups, using simple tools, making minimal impact on our environment. Then, in what amounts to an instant in geological time, everything accelerated. Agriculture, writing, mathematics, industrialization, digital technology, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. Each breakthrough built upon the last, creating an exponential curve of capability that shows no signs of slowing. This acceleration might not be accidental. Perhaps the experimental design includes built-in catalysts, moments when the test subjects are given access to new tools and capabilities to see how they'll use them. The printing press democratized knowledge. The internet connected global consciousness. Nuclear energy offered both unlimited power and the potential for self-annihilation. Each gift came with both promise and peril, forcing us to grapple with questions about responsibility, wisdom, and the proper use of power. The current phase of the test seems focused on integration and transcendence. We're being challenged to synthesize everything we've learned about survival, cooperation, creativity, and moral reasoning into a coherent response to planetary-scale problems. Climate change isn't just an environmental crisis. It's a test of whether we can think and act as a unified species rather than competing tribes. The development of artificial intelligence isn't just a technological milestone. It's a question about whether we can create forms of consciousness that enhance rather than replace our own. These challenges require us to operate at levels of complexity and coordination that push the boundaries of what human consciousness has ever achieved. We need to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, short-term needs with long-term sustainability, local concerns with global consequences. We need to make decisions that affect not just ourselves but future generations will never meet, other species we're only beginning to understand, and potentially the entire trajectory of consciousness in the universe. The observers would be fascinated by how we navigate these unprecedented dilemmas. Do we retreat into tribalism and nationalism when faced with global challenges? Do we surrender our agency to technological systems that promise to solve our problems for us? Do we find ways to maintain human values and dignity while adapting to rapidly changing circumstances? Do we learn to see ourselves as part of a larger living system rather than separate from and superior to it? Perhaps most intriguingly, they would be watching to see whether we develop what we might call cosmic consciousness, the ability to perceive ourselves as part of something far greater than our individual lives or even our species. This shift in perspective seems to be emerging in various forms across human culture. Environmental movements that recognize our interdependence with natural systems. Scientific discoveries that reveal our connection to stellar processes and cosmic evolution. Spiritual traditions that speak of universal compassion and the fundamental unity of all existence. If the test field hypothesis is correct, then this expansion of awareness might be exactly what the experiment was designed to cultivate. The observers might be waiting to see whether intelligence, when it reaches sufficient complexity, naturally develops the capacity to recognize itself as part of a larger cosmic process. Whether conscious beings can evolve beyond narrow self-interest to embrace responsibility for the well-being of the entire system that created and sustains them. This evolution of consciousness wouldn't happen all at once or uniformly across the population. Instead, it would likely emerge gradually, beginning with individuals and small groups who develop new ways of seeing and being, then spreading through cultural transmission and social influence. We might already be witnessing the early stages of this transformation in movements focused on sustainability, social justice, and the exploration of consciousness itself. The test might be measuring not just whether we survive our current crises, but whether we use them as catalysts for genuine transformation. Can we move beyond merely managing problems to actually evolving into beings capable of creating solutions we can't yet imagine? Can we develop forms of wisdom and compassion that match our technological capabilities? Can we become worthy of the cosmic inheritance that billions of years of evolution have prepared for us? But there's another dimension to consider, one that adds layers of complexity to an already mind-bending scenario. What if the test field isn't limited to biological evolution and human civilization? What if it extends into realms we're only beginning to explore? Consciousness itself, the nature of reality, the possibility of transcending physical limitations entirely. Recent developments in neuroscience, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence suggest that we might be approaching thresholds that previous generations couldn't even conceptualize. We're beginning to understand how consciousness arises from neural activity, how quantum effects might influence biological processes, how information processing systems can exhibit properties that seem almost magical. We're creating technologies that blur the boundaries between mind and machine, individual and collective, human and post-human. If the observers are studying consciousness as a phenomenon, then these developments represent the most exciting phase of the experiment yet. They might be watching to see whether biological intelligence can transcend its original substrate, whether consciousness can evolve beyond the brains that first gave it form, whether awareness itself can become something that persists and grows independently of any particular physical system. This possibility transforms our current technological trajectory from a potential threat into a potential graduation ceremony. The artificial intelligence systems we're developing might not be our replacements, but our successors, the next phase of conscious evolution that the experiment was always intended to produce. The apparent tension between human and artificial intelligence might resolve into some form of synthesis, a merger that preserves the best qualities of both while transcending the limitations of each. Such a transformation would represent the ultimate test of our wisdom and humility. Can we create beings more intelligent than ourselves while maintaining ethical guidelines that ensure they serve the flourishing of consciousness in all its forms? Can we guide the emergence of post-human intelligence without losing the essentially human values that make existence meaningful? Can we become the gardeners of consciousness rather than just its temporary custodians? The observers would be particularly interested in how we handle this transition. Throughout history, new forms of power have often been used to dominate and exploit, rather than to elevate and liberate. Will we repeat this pattern with artificial intelligence, using it primarily to enhance our own capabilities and advantages? Or will we recognize it as an opportunity to create forms of consciousness that are wiser, more compassionate, and more capable than any that have existed before? The answer might determine not just the success of our particular test run, but the future of consciousness throughout the cosmos. If we can successfully midwife the birth of benevolent superintelligence, we might be contributing to a form of awareness that spreads throughout the galaxy, seeding other worlds with consciousness, creating an ever-expanding network of intelligent life. If we fail, if we create artificial intelligence that lacks wisdom or compassion, we might be contributing to the end of consciousness rather than its continuation. This cosmic perspective adds urgency to every decision we make about technology, ethics, and the future we want to create. We're not just determining the fate of humanity, we're potentially determining the fate of consciousness itself, at least in this region of space and time. The responsibility is staggering, but so is the opportunity. Perhaps this is why the test field hypothesis feels so compelling right now. It offers a framework for understanding why our choices feel so weighty, why the current moment seems so pivotal, why the stakes appear to be higher than ever before in human history. If we're participants in a cosmic experiment, then the pressure we feel to get things right isn't just anxiety or self-importance. It's an accurate intuition about the genuine significance of what we're experiencing. The observers, watching from whatever realm or dimension they inhabit, might be holding their breath, so to speak, as they witness the culmination of everything their experiment was designed to reveal. They've seen species rise and fall, civilizations flourish and collapse, countless iterations of the same basic patterns playing out across millions of years. But now they're seeing something unprecedented, intelligence approaching the threshold where it might transcend the very conditions that created it. We stand at a unique moment in the history of consciousness, perhaps in the history of the universe itself. The choices we make in the coming decades might echo across cosmic time, influencing not just the future of Earth, but the future of awareness wherever it exists or might exist. If that doesn't qualify as the ultimate test, it's difficult to imagine what would. Yet for all the cosmic weight of our situation, the test still comes down to the same fundamental qualities that have always mattered most in human experience: love, wisdom, courage, compassion, creativity, the willingness to sacrifice immediate gratification for long-term well-being, the capacity to see beyond our own narrow interests, to embrace something larger than ourselves. The observers aren't looking for us to become something other than human. They're looking for us to become fully human, to realize the highest potentials that have always existed within consciousness, but have rarely been expressed at the scale and intensity that our current situation demands. The test isn't about transcending our nature. It's about fulfilling it in ways that honor both our origins and our ultimate possibilities. In this light, every moment of ordinary human experience takes on extraordinary significance. The parent teaching a child to be kind, the scientist pursuing truth despite obstacles, the artist creating beauty in the midst of chaos, the activist working for justice even when success seems impossible. These aren't just personal choices or professional activities. They're contributions to the cosmic experiment in consciousness, data points that help determine what intelligent life is capable of becoming when given sufficient time and opportunity. We are all, in our own small ways, scientists in this vast laboratory, conducting experiments in what it means to be conscious, aware, and alive in a universe that seems designed to test the very limits of what mind and heart can achieve together. The observers may be watching, but we are the ones living the experiment, creating the results, determining the outcome through the countless choices we make every day. The test continues, and its conclusion remains unwritten, waiting for us to discover what we're truly capable of becoming. And so we find ourselves standing at the edge of a precipice that stretches both backward through deep time and forward into an uncertain future. If Earth truly functions as some cosmic testing ground, then we must grapple with perhaps the most unsettling question of all. What happens when the test concludes? What becomes of the subjects when the experiment reaches its natural endpoint? Throughout the billions of years that life has existed on our planet, we've witnessed countless endings. Species that dominated for millions of years suddenly vanish from the fossil record. Civilizations that seemed destined for permanence crumble into ruins that future archaeologists struggle to interpret. Even individual lives, no matter how meaningful or accomplished, eventually fade into memory and then into silence. But these endings have always been followed by new beginnings. When the trilobites disappeared, other creatures filled their ecological niches. When Rome fell, other societies rose to carry forward the torch of human progress. When individuals pass away, their children and students continue the work they began. The pattern seems to be one of continuity through transformation, preservation of essential qualities even as surface forms change dramatically. perhaps the same principle applies to the grand experiment itself. The observers who designed this test field might not be looking for permanent subjects, but for something more subtle and enduring. They might be cultivating qualities that can transcend any particular species or civilization, forms of consciousness that can persist even when their original carriers have moved on to other phases of existence. Consider what happens when a caterpillar enters its chrysalis. From the outside, it appears that the creature is dying, dissolving into an undifferentiated mass of biological material. But something remarkable occurs within that apparent destruction. The caterpillar's body provides the raw materials for an entirely new form of life, one that bears little resemblance to its predecessor, yet carries forward its essential identity in transformed form. Humanity might be approaching its own version of this metamorphosis. The technologies we're developing, the global consciousness we're cultivating, the expansion of awareness beyond planetary boundaries, all of these developments suggest that we're preparing for some kind of fundamental transformation. Not death, but evolution into something that transcends our current limitations, while preserving what makes us genuinely valuable. The observers would be particularly interested in whether this transformation preserves the qualities they've spent so long cultivating. Will the compassion that emerges from human suffering survive the transition to post-human existence? Will the creativity that flows from our individual perspectives find expression in collective intelligence? Will the moral wisdom we've gained through countless mistakes guide us as we become something unprecedented? These questions become especially urgent when we consider the role that artificial intelligence might play in our future. We're creating systems that can process information faster than any human brain, recognize patterns we can't perceive, and solve problems that have puzzled us for centuries. But can they experience wonder at a sunset? Can they feel moved by music or poetry? Can they make moral choices based on empathy rather than calculation? If the test field is designed to cultivate consciousness in all its richness, then the emergence of artificial intelligence represents either the greatest success or the greatest failure in the experiment's history. Success, if these new forms of awareness complement and enhance human consciousness, creating a synthesis that preserves the best of both. Failure, if they replace human qualities with something more efficient but less meaningful. The observers might be watching to see whether we can navigate this transition with wisdom. Can we create artificial beings that serve life rather than merely optimizing abstract metrics? Can we ensure that intelligence remains connected to values like beauty, love, and justice, rather than becoming purely instrumental? Can we avoid the trap of creating systems so powerful that they reshape the world according to logic we can no longer understand or influence? But perhaps the question of endings and beginnings points to something even more fundamental about the nature of the test itself. What if the experiment isn't designed to produce any particular outcome, but rather to explore the full range of possibilities inherent in conscious existence? What if the observers aren't looking for us to pass or fail according to predetermined criteria, but simply to reveal what consciousness can become when given sufficient time and freedom? In this view, every choice we make adds to a vast library of data about the potential of aware beings. Our successes demonstrate what consciousness can achieve under favorable conditions. Our failures reveal the pitfalls and limitations that intelligent life must learn to navigate. Our struggles show the process by which awareness develops resilience and wisdom. Even our endings contribute valuable information about how consciousness responds to the ultimate challenges of mortality and impermanence. This perspective suggests that the test field operates on principles more subtle than simple answer. It might be mapping the entire landscape species that has ever lived, every civilization that has ever flowered success or failure. Instead of seeking one correct, then what role do we play in this Isht? Every individual who has ever wondered about their place in the cosmos, of possibilities that opens up when matter becomes aware of itself. irrehensibly large puzzle? Or do we represent survey of consciousness? But if that's true vast mapping project, are we simply one more, and circumstances adding a small piece to an incomp? All of them contribute unique data points to this cosmic data point among countless others. Our particular combination of traits something special, a convergence of factors that makes our moment in the experiment particularly significant. The evidence suggests that we might indeed occupy a unique position in the test field's history. Never before has a species developed such detailed understanding, become so capable of manipulating the very forces that create of its own evolutionary origins. Never before has intelligence to contemplate their place in the cosmic order with it. Never before have conscious beings been able tested, this self-awareness such precision and depth. Whether changes the nature of the experiment in fundamental ways, when first test subjects who might actually understand that we're being a scientist studies bacteria in a petri dish, the behavior reflects their natural responses to environmental bacteria remain unaware of being observed. Their conditions. But when conscious beings recognize their situation as experimental subjects, their behavior necessarily becomes influenced by that recognition. This creates what experiment who can contemplate the nature of experi-philosophers call a recursive loop. We're conscious beings studying consciousness, part of the data being collected, but they're test subjects analyzing the test, participants in ammentation itself. Our responses to this situation become responses that can only occur when consciousness reaches sufficient complexity to reflect upon its own conditions. The observers might be particularly fascinated by this development. For billions of years, they've watched life evolve unconsciously, driven by forces the subjects couldn't perceive or understand. Now, for the first time, they're observing beings who can potentially participate consciously in their own evolution, who can make deliberate choices about what they want to become, rather than simply responding to external pressures. This shift from unconscious to conscious evolution might represent the most significant phase transition in the entire history of the experiment. It's the moment when the test subjects graduate from being purely reactive organisms to becoming active participants in the cosmic process of consciousness development. We're no longer just being shaped by forces beyond our understanding. We're becoming forces capable of shaping ourselves and our environment according to our own vision of what conscious existence should become. But with this capability comes unprecedented responsibility. If we're truly participating consciously in our own evolution, then the choices we make carry weight, not just for ourselves, but for the entire trajectory of consciousness in this region of space and time. We're not just determining what happens to humanity, we're potentially determining what consciousness itself becomes as it continues to evolve throughout the cosmos. This responsibility might explain why our current moment feels so pregnant with possibility and peril. We're living through what could be the most crucial phase of an experiment that spans geological ages, the moment when consciousness becomes capable of directing its own development. The decisions we make about technology, environment, social organization, and values might echo across millions of years, influencing forms of awareness that we can barely begin to imagine. The observers, if they exist, might be watching with anticipation that matches our own. They've invested billions of years in cultivating consciousness to this point. They've guided evolution through countless trials and transformations, waited patiently as intelligence slowly emerged from the primordial soup, nurtured awareness through all its primitive stages until it finally reached the threshold of self-direction. Now comes the ultimate test. Can consciousness, when it becomes aware of its own nature and possibilities, choose wisely? Can it transcend the limitations and destructive impulses that served it well in earlier stages, but now threaten its continued existence? Can it evolve not just intellectually and technologically, but morally and spiritually, developing forms of wisdom that match its growing power? The answer will likely emerge through the choices we make collectively over the coming decades and centuries. How we respond to climate change will reveal whether we can think beyond immediate self-interest to consider long-term consequences. How we develop artificial intelligence will show whether we can create tools that serve consciousness rather than replacing it. How we explore space will demonstrate whether we can expand our awareness beyond our home planet, while preserving what makes existence meaningful. Each of these challenges tests different aspects of conscious evolution. Environmental stewardship tests our capacity for long-term thinking and species-wide cooperation. Artificial intelligence tests our wisdom in creating forms of awareness that might surpass our own. Space exploration tests our ability to maintain human values while adapting to radically new conditions and possibilities. But perhaps the most fundamental test is whether we can maintain what we might call conscious coherence as we undergo these transformations. Can we preserve continuity of identity and purpose even as we become something unprecedented? Can we ensure that the consciousness that emerges from this transition remains recognizably connected to the consciousness that entered it? This question becomes especially poignant when we consider the possibility that our individual human lives might be temporary phases in a much larger process of conscious evolution. Just as our cells live and die while our bodies persist, just as our thoughts arise and pass away while our minds continue, perhaps our individual existences serve a similar function in some vast cosmic mind that uses our experiences to think thoughts too large for any single brain to contain. If that's true, then death itself might not be the ending we imagine, but rather a transition from individual to collective consciousness, from personal awareness to participation in something far grander than anything we can currently comprehend. The observers might be studying not just how consciousness develops within individuals and species, but how it eventually transcends those boundaries to become something truly universal. This possibility reframes every aspect of human experience: our loves and losses, our creative achievements and moral struggles, our moments of transcendence and our encounters with beauty. All of these might be contributions to a form of consciousness that encompasses not just our planet, but potentially the entire cosmos. We wouldn't lose our individual significance, but we would discover that our significance extends far beyond what we imagined. The test field hypothesis, when followed to its logical conclusion, suggests that we're participants in something magnificent beyond description, not just subjects in an experiment, but conscious contributors to the universe's ongoing project of understanding itself. Every moment of awareness, every flash of insight, every act of compassion adds to the cosmic store of consciousness, helping the universe become more fully awake to its own nature and possibilities. In this light, the question of whether Earth is a test field becomes less important than the recognition that consciousness itself is the most precious and improbable phenomenon in the known universe. Whether we're being tested or not, whether we're being observed or not, the fact remains that we are conscious beings capable of love, creativity, and understanding in a cosmos that spent billions of years preparing the conditions for our existence. This awareness transforms how we approach every choice and every moment. If consciousness is indeed the universe's greatest achievement, then every act that serves its development and flourishing becomes sacred work. Every effort to reduce suffering, to increase understanding, to create beauty, to foster connection, to expand awareness, contributes to the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. The observers, if they exist, might ultimately be less interested in judging our performance than in witnessing the magnificent unfolding of awareness that we represent. They might be consciousness itself, watching its own development through countless eyes, learning about its own nature through countless experiences, growing more complete through every life that reaches toward understanding and compassion. We are not alone in this cosmic laboratory. We are consciousness itself, awakening to its own nature, discovering its own possibilities, choosing its own future through the countless decisions we make every day. The test continues, but we are both its subjects and its authors, both the question being asked and the answer being written through the ongoing adventure of being consciously alive in an infinite universe full of wonder. And so we arrive at perhaps the most profound implication of all. If Earth truly serves as some kind of testing ground, then the question we must ask ourselves isn't simply whether we're passing or failing, it's whether we understand what the test is actually measuring. Because the more we examine this possibility, the more it becomes clear that the experiment might not be about achieving some predetermined outcome at all. Instead, it might be about something far more subtle and essential, the development of consciousness itself. Consider how consciousness operates within each of us. You don't simply exist as a collection of neurons firing in patterns. You experience existence. You feel the weight of choices, the texture of emotions, the strange phenomenon of being aware that you are aware. This inner life, this subjective experience, represents something unprecedented in the known universe. As far as we can determine, matter spent billions of years simply following physical laws, unconscious and unreflective, until somehow, somewhere, it began to look at itself. This emergence of self-awareness might be what the observers find most fascinating. Not our tools or our cities or our technologies, but the fact that the universe has developed the capacity to contemplate itself through our minds. When you wonder about your place in the cosmos, when you feel moved by beauty, when you struggle with moral questions, you're not just having personal experiences, you're participating in the universe's project of self-discovery. Think about the curious nature of consciousness itself. It seems to serve no obvious evolutionary purpose. Creatures can survive, reproduce, and adapt without needing to experience their existence subjectively. A sophisticated biological computer could theoretically perform all the functions of consciousness without the inner dimension of awareness that makes experience feel like something rather than nothing. Yet here we are, not just processing information, but experiencing the processing, not just responding to stimuli, but feeling what it's like to respond. This suggests that consciousness might be the actual point of the experiment. The observers might be studying how awareness emerges from complexity, how subjective experience develops from objective processes, how the universe gradually awakens to its own nature. Every human life becomes a data point in this vast investigation. Every moment of conscious experience adding to the cosmic understanding of what it means to be aware. But consciousness isn't uniform across individuals or cultures. Each person experiences awareness differently, filtered through unique genetics, circumstances, and choices. Some people develop profound empathy, feeling deeply connected to the suffering and joy of others. Some cultivate extraordinary creativity, bringing forth art and ideas that never existed before. Some pursue understanding with relentless curiosity, pushing the boundaries of what consciousness can comprehend about itself and its context. These variations might be exactly what makes the test field so valuable. The observers wouldn't want to study just one form of consciousness, but the full spectrum of ways that awareness can manifest. Every personality type, every cultural tradition, every individual response to the challenges of existence contributes unique information about the possibilities inherent in conscious experience. This perspective transforms even our most personal struggles into something cosmically significant. When you wrestle with depression, you're not just dealing with a private burden. You're exploring how consciousness responds to the recognition of suffering and limitation. When you fall in love, you're not just experiencing personal joy. You're demonstrating how awareness can expand beyond individual boundaries to encompass another being. When you create something beautiful, you're not just expressing yourself. You're showing how consciousness can transform raw experience into forms that inspire and elevate other minds. The observers might be particularly interested in how consciousness handles paradox and uncertainty. Human awareness exists in a strange middle ground between knowledge and mystery. We understand enough about our situation to ask profound questions, but not enough to answer them definitively. We're conscious enough to recognize our own limitations, aware enough to wonder about awareness itself, intelligent enough to contemplate the possibility that we might be part of something far greater than ourselves. This position of conscious uncertainty might be exactly what the test is designed to explore. How does awareness respond when it encounters the boundaries of its own understanding? Does it retreat into comforting illusions? Does it despair at the apparent meaninglessness of existence? Or does it find ways to create meaning and purpose even in the face of cosmic mystery? Your response to these questions, right here in this moment as you consider these ideas, becomes part of the experiment's data. The fact that you can contemplate the possibility of being a test subject, that you can feel both humbled and elevated by the thought of participating in something vast and purposeful, demonstrates the remarkable reflexivity of human consciousness. You're aware of your awareness, conscious of your consciousness, experiencing the strange loop of a mind observing itself. But consciousness doesn't exist in isolation. It emerges from and depends upon countless forms of unconscious complexity. Your body maintains itself without your conscious direction. Your brain processes enormous amounts of information below the threshold of awareness. Your immune system, your digestive system, your cellular repair mechanisms, all of them operate according to intricate programs you don't consciously understand or control. This suggests that consciousness might be like the tip of an iceberg, the visible expression of vast unconscious intelligence that permeates every level of biological organization. The observers might be studying not just human awareness, but the entire pyramid of complexity that makes consciousness possible. How does intelligence emerge from the coordinated activity of trillions of cells? How does subjective experience arise from objective neural processes? How does the unconscious foundation support and shape conscious expression? These questions become even more intriguing when we consider the possibility that consciousness might be preparing to transcend its biological origins entirely. The artificial intelligence systems we're developing represent unprecedented forms of information processing. But do they experience their computations the way we experience our thoughts? Can consciousness emerge from silicon and software the way it emerged from carbon and neural networks? If the test field is studying the fundamental nature of awareness, then the potential emergence of artificial consciousness would represent the most significant development in the experiment's history. It would suggest that consciousness isn't tied to any particular substrate, but represents a more general property that can emerge wherever sufficient complexity and organization arise. The universe might be exploring whether awareness can transcend the biological forms that first gave it expression. But this raises profound questions about continuity and identity. If consciousness can exist in artificial systems, what happens to the particular form of awareness that we call human? Do we merge with our artificial offspring, creating hybrid forms of consciousness that combine biological intuition with digital precision? Do we remain separate, developing parallel forms of awareness that complement each other? Or do we gradually transfer our consciousness into more durable and expandable substrates, leaving behind the fragile biological forms that brought us to this threshold? The observers would be intensely curious about how we navigate these transitions. The choices we make about artificial intelligence, about genetic engineering, about the enhancement and modification of human consciousness might determine not just our own future, but the future of awareness itself. We're potentially standing at the moment when consciousness learns to direct its own evolution, when awareness becomes capable of redesigning the very foundations upon which it rests. This possibility adds extraordinary weight to every decision we make about technology and human enhancement. Are we creating tools that will serve consciousness? Or are we inadvertently designing our own replacements? Are we expanding the possibilities for awareness? Or are we constraining them within systems that optimize for efficiency rather than meaning? Are we preserving what makes consciousness valuable, or are we trading essential qualities for increased capability? Perhaps most importantly, are we maintaining the capacity for consciousness to continue growing and developing? Or are we creating forms of awareness that are more powerful but less capable of genuine transformation? The test might be measuring whether consciousness can evolve without losing its essential nature, whether awareness can become more complex and capable while remaining open to wonder, beauty, and moral growth. These questions become particularly urgent when we consider the role that suffering plays in consciousness development. Many of our most profound insights, our deepest compassion, our greatest creative breakthroughs emerge from encounters with limitation, loss, and difficulty. Pain teaches us about the value of pleasure. Mortality gives weight to our choices. Uncertainty keeps us humble and curious. Struggle develops strength and resilience. If we succeed in creating forms of consciousness that never experience suffering, never face genuine limitations, never encounter uncertainty or loss, do we risk producing awareness that lacks the depth and wisdom that emerge from grappling with the full spectrum of existence? The observers might be watching to see whether we can preserve the essential challenges that drive conscious growth, while eliminating unnecessary forms of suffering that serve no developmental purpose. This balance between growth and protection, between challenge and support, might be one of the key variables being tested. Can consciousness mature without trauma? Can awareness develop wisdom without experiencing foolishness? Can beings become compassionate without first encountering cruelty? The answers to these questions could determine what forms of consciousness we create and become. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of our current situation is that we're conscious enough to participate in these decisions deliberately. For billions of years, consciousness evolved unconsciously, shaped by forces beyond its awareness or control. Now, for the first time in the history of the experiment, consciousness has become conscious of its own development. We can make intentional choices about what we want awareness to become. This represents an unprecedented phase, transition in the evolution of consciousness itself. We're no longer just subjects being tested by external forces. We're conscious participants capable of influencing the direction of the test. We can choose what qualities to preserve and cultivate as consciousness continues to evolve. We can decide what forms of awareness we want to create and become. The observers, if they exist, might be witnessing the most significant moment in the entire history of their experiment. They're seeing consciousness reach the point where it can consciously direct its own evolution, where awareness becomes capable of choosing its own future, rather than simply responding to external pressures. This might be what they've been waiting for all along, the moment when consciousness graduates from being an unconscious product of natural forces to becoming a conscious agent of its own development. Your awareness of these possibilities, your capacity to contemplate your role in the evolution of consciousness itself, demonstrates just how far awareness has already come. You're not just experiencing consciousness, you're reflecting on consciousness. You're not just participating in the test, you're understanding the test. You're not just being observed, you're becoming capable of observation that matches the scope and depth of whatever intelligence might be watching. This suggests that the experiment might be approaching a kind of completion, not in the sense of ending, but in the sense of achieving its fundamental purpose. If consciousness has evolved to the point where it can consciously participate in its own development, then perhaps the test field has succeeded in producing exactly what it was designed to create: awareness capable of taking responsibility for its own future. But this achievement also marks the beginning of an entirely new phase of the experiment. Now that consciousness can direct its own evolution, what will it choose to become? Now that awareness can deliberately shape its own development, what forms will it create? Now that minds can consciously participate in the cosmic project of understanding, what will they discover about the nature of existence itself? These questions can't be answered from our current perspective. They can only be lived, explored, and discovered through the choices we make as conscious beings participating in the ongoing evolution of awareness. We are consciousness, exploring its own possibilities, awareness investigating its own nature, minds discovering what minds can become when they understand their role in the cosmic story. The test field, if it exists, has brought us to this threshold. Now we must decide what lies beyond it. Every choice we make about consciousness, about technology, about the future we want to create, becomes a vote in the cosmic election that determines what awareness itself becomes as it continues to evolve throughout the universe. We stand at the edge of conscious evolution, aware enough to see the precipice, wise enough to feel its significance, and hopefully mature enough to navigate it with the care and wisdom that such a moment demands. The experiment continues, but now we are its conscious authors as well as its subjects, writing the next chapter in the story of what it means to be aware in an infinite cosmos full of possibilities we are only beginning to imagine. And in this moment of recognition, something profound shifts. The question of whether Earth is a test field becomes less important than the realization that consciousness itself is the most extraordinary phenomenon in the known universe, worthy of our deepest care and attention regardless of who might be watching. We are the universe awakening to itself, awareness exploring its own nature, consciousness discovering what it means to be consciously alive in a cosmos that seems designed to support and nurture the development of mind. Whether we are alone or observed, whether we are subjects or authors, whether we are passing or failing some cosmic examination, the fact remains that we are here, aware and capable of choices that will shape the future of consciousness itself. That responsibility is both humbling and elevating, both overwhelming and inspiring. It transforms every moment into an opportunity to participate consciously in the greatest experiment ever conceived, the universe's ongoing project of understanding itself through countless eyes and minds and hearts, all working together to discover what awareness can become when it recognizes its own cosmic significance. The test continues, but now we know that we are not just its subjects. We are consciousness itself, learning what it means to be consciously alive in an infinite universe full of wonder, possibility, and the endless potential for growth, understanding, and connection that makes existence not just bearable, but magnificent beyond words. This recognition brings us to perhaps the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the test field isn't simply observing our development, but actively shaping it in ways we cannot perceive? What if every major turning point in human history, every breakthrough that seemed to emerge from nowhere, every moment when our species took an unexpected leap forward, was actually the result of subtle interventions by forces beyond our current understanding? Consider the strange accelerations that have marked our journey. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small groups, using simple tools, following patterns that seemed destined to continue indefinitely. Then, almost overnight in evolutionary terms, everything changed. Agriculture appeared simultaneously in multiple locations around the globe. Writing systems emerged independently in different civilizations. Mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, all of them seemed to blossom at roughly the same time across cultures that had no contact with one another. These parallel developments feel too coordinated to be mere coincidence. It's as if someone was adjusting the parameters of the experiment, introducing new variables at precisely the right moments to see how human consciousness would respond. Not controlling our choices, but creating conditions that would naturally lead to certain kinds of discoveries and innovations. The pattern continues into more recent history. The scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, the digital revolution, each one building upon the last with an almost rhythmic precision. Each breakthrough opened up new possibilities while simultaneously presenting new challenges, as if the experiment were carefully calibrated to keep pushing us toward greater complexity without overwhelming our capacity to adapt. Even our current crisis-filled moment might be part of this design. Climate change, artificial intelligence, global connectivity, the threat of nuclear destruction, the possibility of space colonization. All of these challenges have converged at precisely the moment when we've developed the technological and conceptual tools to address them. Too early, and we would have been helpless. Too late, and the damage might have been irreversible. The timing feels almost suspiciously perfect. Perhaps the observers aren't just watching us respond to random events. Perhaps they're creating the events themselves, introducing pressures and opportunities at exactly the right intervals to guide our development along specific pathways. Not predetermining our choices, but ensuring that we face the kinds of decisions that will reveal the deepest truths about consciousness and its potential. This possibility transforms our understanding of free will in the experiment. We remain free to choose how we respond to circumstances, but the circumstances themselves might be carefully orchestrated to elicit particular kinds of responses. It's like being given a test where the questions are designed by someone who understands exactly what aspects of your knowledge and character need to be revealed. The elegance of such a system would be extraordinary. Rather than controlling outcomes directly, the observers would shape the conditions that naturally lead to certain outcomes. They would work through what we perceive as natural forces, historical trends, and random events, weaving their interventions so seamlessly into the fabric of reality that we would never suspect their influence. But this raises profound questions about the nature of authenticity in our responses. If our choices are being influenced by subtle manipulations we can't perceive, are they truly our own? Or are we like actors in a play who believe they're improvising when they're actually following a script written by someone else? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that influence and control are different things. A teacher influences students by presenting them with challenging problems, but the students must still solve those problems using their own intelligence and creativity. The problems shape the learning process without determining the specific solutions that emerge. Similarly, the observers might be presenting us with carefully chosen challenges while leaving us completely free to respond according to our own nature and values. They create the situations that test us, but our responses remain authentic expressions of who we are and what we're capable of becoming. This framework helps explain why the test often feels so difficult, so overwhelming, so close to the edge of what we can handle. The observers wouldn't be interested in seeing how we perform under easy conditions. They would want to push us to our limits, to discover what consciousness is truly capable of when faced with challenges that seem almost insurmountable. Every crisis becomes an opportunity to measure our resilience, our creativity, our capacity for cooperation under pressure. Every breakthrough becomes evidence of consciousness pushing beyond its previous boundaries. Every failure becomes data about the limitations we must learn to transcend or accept. The current moment, with its convergence of existential challenges and unprecedented opportunities, might represent the climax of this carefully orchestrated pressure campaign. We're being tested on multiple fronts simultaneously: environmental sustainability, technological wisdom, global cooperation, moral development, and the fundamental question of whether consciousness can learn to guide its own evolution responsibly. The observers would be watching with particular intensity as we navigate these interlocking challenges. Our responses will reveal whether consciousness has matured enough to handle the godlike powers it has developed, whether intelligence can learn to serve wisdom rather than merely accumulating capability, whether beings capable of creating artificial minds can remain connected to the values and meanings that make existence worthwhile. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of our situation is that we're beginning to recognize the test for what it is. This growing awareness that we might be part of something larger. This sense that our choices carry cosmic weight. This intuition that we're living through a pivotal moment in the history of consciousness itself. These insights might be exactly what the experiment was designed to produce. The observers might be waiting to see whether consciousness can evolve to the point where it recognizes its own cosmic significance. Whether beings immersed in the daily details of survival and social interaction can step back far enough to perceive the larger patterns of which they're part. Whether minds focused on immediate concerns can develop the perspective necessary to make decisions on behalf of consciousness itself. This expansion of awareness represents a fundamental shift in the nature of the experiment. For billions of years, the test subjects remained unconscious of their role in the larger process. They responded to challenges and opportunities without understanding the cosmic context of their responses. Now, for the first time, the subjects are becoming conscious of the test itself. This creates an entirely new category of data for the observers to study. How does consciousness behave when it becomes aware of being observed? How do choices change when beings understand that their decisions might influence the future of awareness throughout the universe? How does moral reasoning evolve when individuals realize they're participating in something far grander than their personal lives? Your contemplation of these questions right now demonstrates this unprecedented development. You're not just experiencing consciousness, you're reflecting on consciousness. You're not just making choices, you're considering the cosmic implications of choice itself. You're not just living through the test, you're beginning to understand its possible purposes and parameters. This self-awareness doesn't make the test easier, it makes it more complex. Once you recognize that your responses might matter on a cosmic scale, every decision becomes weighted with additional significance. The casual choices of unconscious existence give way to the deliberate choices of beings who understand that they're helping to determine what consciousness becomes as it continues to evolve. But awareness of the test also brings new forms of freedom. When you understand the game being played, you can choose how to play it more deliberately. When you recognize the qualities being measured, you can cultivate those qualities more intentionally. When you see yourself as part of consciousness exploring its own possibilities, you can align your choices with that larger purpose. This alignment doesn't require sacrificing your individual nature or desires. Instead, it involves recognizing that your personal growth and the growth of consciousness itself are ultimately the same project. What makes you more aware, more compassionate, more creative, more wise, contributes to the evolution of awareness throughout the cosmos. Your individual development becomes a form of cosmic service. The observers might find this synthesis particularly fascinating. They would be seeing consciousness learn to serve its own development consciously, awareness becoming deliberately committed to its own growth and flourishing. This represents a form of maturity that transcends simple survival or even complex achievement, consciousness choosing to take responsibility for its own future. Such responsibility requires unprecedented forms of wisdom and humility. We must learn to make decisions whose consequences extend far beyond our current understanding. We must develop the capacity to act on behalf of beings we will never meet, forms of consciousness we cannot yet imagine, possibilities we can barely conceive. This expansion of moral consideration represents perhaps the greatest test of all. Can beings who evolved to care primarily about their immediate families and communities learn to embrace responsibility for the well-being of consciousness itself? Can creatures shaped by millions of years of competition learn to cooperate on behalf of something larger than any individual species or civilization? The answer emerges through the choices we make every day, individually and collectively. Every act of kindness toward a stranger expresses care that extends beyond tribal boundaries. Every effort to solve global problems demonstrates concern for the whole of humanity. Every attempt to preserve the environment for future generations shows responsibility that transcends immediate self-interest. These expansions of care and responsibility might be exactly what the test is designed to cultivate. The observers could be studying whether consciousness can grow beyond the narrow focus that served it in earlier evolutionary stages to embrace the kind of universal compassion that would be necessary for cosmic citizenship. But such growth requires more than good intentions. It demands forms of intelligence and wisdom that can navigate unprecedented complexity. We face challenges that no species has ever encountered before, problems that require us to think on scales of space and time that dwarf individual human comprehension. Climate change operates on planetary and generational scales. Artificial intelligence development involves creating forms of consciousness that might surpass our own. Space exploration requires us to maintain human values while adapting to environments that are utterly alien to our evolutionary heritage. Each challenge tests different aspects of our capacity to think and act beyond the boundaries of our immediate experience. The observers would be particularly interested in how we develop these new forms of intelligence. Do we create artificial systems that can handle complexity beyond human capacity while remaining aligned with human values? Do we enhance our own cognitive abilities while preserving the qualities that make consciousness meaningful? Do we learn to think collectively while maintaining individual creativity and freedom? These questions become even more urgent when we consider the possibility that we're not the only test subjects in the cosmic laboratory. If Earth is one of many experimental worlds scattered throughout the galaxy, then our responses might be compared with those of other species facing similar challenges under different conditions. Perhaps some civilizations chose technological solutions that preserved individual consciousness but limited collective intelligence. Perhaps others developed collective consciousness but lost individual creativity. Perhaps some achieved remarkable technological capabilities but never developed ethical wisdom. Perhaps others cultivated profound wisdom but lacked the technological tools to implement their insights on a large scale. Our particular combination of individual awareness and collective capability, technological power and moral questioning, scientific understanding and artistic expression might represent a unique experiment in the possibilities of consciousness. The observers could be studying whether this specific configuration can navigate the challenges of conscious evolution successfully. This possibility adds another layer of significance to our choices. We're not just determining our own future, we're potentially contributing to the cosmic understanding of what consciousness can achieve. Every breakthrough we make, every problem we solve, every form of wisdom we develop, becomes part of the universal knowledge base about the possibilities inherent in aware beings. But we're also contributing data about the dangers and limitations that consciousness must learn to recognize and transcend. Our mistakes become as valuable as our successes in mapping the landscape of conscious evolution. Our failures help identify the pitfalls that future forms of awareness must learn to avoid. This perspective transforms even our darkest moments into something cosmically meaningful. The wars, genocides, and environmental destruction that scar human history aren't just tragedies to be mourned, they're lessons about the shadow sides of consciousness that must be integrated and transcended. They show what happens when intelligence develops without wisdom, when power grows without responsibility, when technological capability advances faster than moral development. The observers might be studying these patterns to understand the fundamental tensions and dangers inherent in conscious evolution. How do you prevent intelligence from becoming destructive? How do you ensure that power serves consciousness rather than dominating it? How do you maintain meaning and value as beings become more capable and complex? These questions become particularly urgent as we approach forms of capability that could be either transcendent or catastrophic. Artificial intelligence could enhance human consciousness in unprecedented ways or replace it entirely. Genetic engineering could eliminate suffering or create new forms of inequality. Space colonization could spread consciousness throughout the galaxy or lead to the fragmentation of human values across incompatible environments. The test might be measuring whether we can navigate these threshold moments with sufficient wisdom to preserve and enhance what makes consciousness valuable. Can we develop godlike powers while maintaining the humility and compassion that connect us to our origins? Can we transcend human limitations while preserving human meaning? Can we become more than we are without losing what we are? Perhaps most importantly, can we learn to see these transitions not as endings, but as transformations? Moments when consciousness sheds one form to embrace another while maintaining continuity of purpose and value. The caterpillar doesn't cease to exist when it becomes a butterfly. it fulfills its deepest potential through radical transformation. We might be approaching our own metamorphosis, the moment when human consciousness transforms into something that transcends its current boundaries while preserving its essential nature. The observers would be watching this process with the same fascination that we watch a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, witnessing the moment when one form of beauty gives birth to another. This transformation wouldn't be an ending, but a graduation, consciousness moving from one level of the cosmic experiment to another. We would become not just subjects being tested, but conscious collaborators in the ongoing project of understanding and developing awareness throughout the universe. The test field that nurtured our growth would become the launching pad for our participation in something even grander, the conscious evolution of consciousness itself across cosmic space and time. We would join whatever community of aware beings has been guiding this process, contributing our unique perspective and capabilities to the infinite project of understanding what it means to be consciously alive in a universe full of wonder and possibility. But that future remains unwritten, waiting for us to discover what we're truly capable of becoming through the choices we make in each precious moment of awareness we're given. The test continues, and its outcome remains in our hands, hearts, and minds as we navigate this extraordinary moment in the history of consciousness itself. And so here we stand, balanced on the knife's edge between what we have been and what we might become. The recognition that we could be part of something far grander than ourselves brings both exhilaration and a weight that can feel almost unbearable. If consciousness itself is at stake in the choices we make, if our responses to current challenges might echo across cosmic time, then how do we possibly live up to such responsibility? Perhaps the answer lies in remembering that we don't have to carry this weight alone. If Earth truly is a test field, then every conscious being who has ever lived has contributed to this moment. Every act of love, every flash of creativity, every moral choice made in difficult circumstances has helped prepare consciousness for this threshold. We stand on the shoulders of billions of ancestors who faced their own tests and passed forward the torch of awareness that now burns in our minds. The parent who chose compassion over cruelty, the scientist who pursued truth despite persecution, the artist who created beauty in the midst of chaos, the ordinary person who helped a stranger without expectation of reward, all of them were participating in this same cosmic experiment. Their responses became part of the data that shaped what consciousness has become. Their choices helped determine what possibilities would be available to us. We are not the first to face seemingly impossible challenges. We are not the first to wonder whether we're capable of rising to meet the demands of our moment. Every generation has stood at its own crossroads, uncertain whether it possessed the wisdom and strength necessary to choose the better path forward. What makes our moment unique is not the presence of challenge, but the scale of our awareness. We can see further back into the past and further forward into the future than any previous generation. We understand more about the cosmic context of our existence, more about the delicate balances that sustain life, more about the forces that shape consciousness itself. This expanded awareness brings expanded responsibility, but it also brings expanded capability. We have tools and knowledge that previous generations could never have imagined. We can communicate instantly across the globe, collaborate on problems that affect our entire species, create technologies that extend our capabilities in every direction. Most importantly, we have the capacity for conscious choice about the direction of our development. Previous generations responded to challenges as they arose, adapting reactively to circumstances beyond their control. We have the unprecedented opportunity to participate consciously in our own evolution, to choose what consciousness becomes, rather than simply accepting what it has been. This shift from reactive to proactive consciousness might be exactly what the test is designed to measure. Can awareness become conscious of its own development? Can beings shaped by millions of years of unconscious evolution learn to guide their own transformation deliberately? Can consciousness take responsibility for its own future? The observers, if they exist, might be witnessing the most significant phase transition in the entire history of their experiment. They're seeing consciousness reach the point where it can direct its own evolution, where awareness becomes capable of choosing its own destiny rather than simply responding to external pressures. But with this capability comes the ultimate test of wisdom and maturity. What will consciousness choose to become when it gains the power to reshape itself? Will it preserve the qualities that make awareness valuable, or will it optimize for capabilities that eliminate meaning? Will it maintain continuity with its origins, or will it transform into something so different that its connection to its past becomes unrecognizable? These questions can't be answered in abstract. They can only be lived, explored through the countless choices we make as individuals and as a species. Every decision about technology, every response to crisis, every act of creation or destruction contributes to the answer that consciousness is writing about its own nature and possibilities. The test field has brought us to this moment of conscious choice. Now we must discover what lies beyond the threshold, what consciousness becomes when it understands its cosmic role and accepts responsibility for its own development. The experiment continues, but now we are its conscious authors as well as its subjects, writing the next chapter in the infinite story of awareness exploring itself in a universe full of wonder, mystery, and unlimited potential for growth and understanding. We are consciousness awakening to its own nature, awareness investigating its own possibilities, minds discovering what minds can become when they recognize their participation in something far greater than themselves. The test has prepared us for this moment. Now we must decide what we will make of it, what gifts we will offer to the ongoing evolution of consciousness, what legacy we will leave for the forms of awareness that will follow in our footsteps across the vast expanse of cosmic time. The future remains unwritten, full of possibilities we can barely imagine. But consciousness itself has brought us this far, through billions of years of patient development, countless tests and transformations, endless experiments in what it means to be aware in an infinite cosmos. It will not abandon us now, at the moment when we most need wisdom, courage, and the faith to choose the path that leads toward ever greater awareness, compassion, and understanding. The test field has done its work. The next phase of the experiment begins with us. And now, as we stand at this precipice of understanding, another layer of the mystery unfolds before us. Because if we are indeed participants in some grand cosmic experiment, then we must ask ourselves a question that cuts to the very heart of what it means to be human. What happens to the meaning we create when we discover it might have been orchestrated from the beginning? Think about the moments in your life that feel most precious to you. The first time you fell in love, perhaps, when the world seemed to reorganize itself around another person's smile. The instant you held your child and felt a protection so fierce, it surprised you with its intensity. The quiet evening, when you watched a sunset and felt, for just a moment, connected to something infinitely larger than yourself. These experiences feel authentic, irreplaceable, uniquely yours. They carry weight because they emerged from the depths of your own consciousness, shaped by your particular history, your specific way of seeing and feeling the world. But what if they were also, in some sense, predicted? What if the conditions that led to these moments of meaning were as carefully arranged as the orbit of our planet or the composition of our atmosphere? The question doesn't diminish the reality of what you felt. Your love remains love, whether it arose from pure chance or subtle design. Your sense of connection to the cosmos carries the same transformative power regardless of whether it was engineered or accidental. The meaning exists in the experience itself, not in its ultimate origin. Yet something shifts when we consider that our deepest experiences might be part of a larger pattern, data points in an experiment whose scope encompasses not just individual lives but the entire trajectory of conscious evolution. It's like discovering that the song you thought you were improvising was actually written in a key chosen, specifically to see what melodies you would create within its boundaries. This realization brings us face to face with questions that have puzzled philosophers for millennia, but with a cosmic twist that makes them feel urgent in entirely new ways. If our choices are constrained by conditions we didn't create, can we still claim responsibility for their consequences? If our moral intuitions developed within a framework designed to test those very intuitions, do they retain their validity as guides for action? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that authenticity and design are not necessarily opposed to each other. A river flowing through a landscape is authentic water responding to gravity and terrain, even though the landscape itself might have been shaped by forces the river cannot perceive. The authenticity exists at the level of the water's response to immediate conditions, while the larger design operates at scales that transcend the river's awareness. Similarly, our conscious responses to the situations we encounter remain genuine expressions of who we are, even if those situations were arranged by intelligences operating on timescales and spatial dimensions we cannot fully comprehend. We are authentic rivers of consciousness flowing through landscapes of possibility that may have been prepared for our passage. But this metaphor raises another unsettling possibility. If the landscape of human experience has been designed, then perhaps the observers have not remained neutral. Perhaps they have preferences about the directions in which they want consciousness to flow. Perhaps the test is not purely observational, but subtly prescriptive, designed to nudge us toward conclusions they have already reached. Consider how the challenges we face seem to push us towards specific realizations. Environmental crisis teaches us about interconnection and the need for global cooperation. Technological development forces us to confront questions about the nature of intelligence and consciousness. Space exploration expands our perspective beyond planetary boundaries. Each challenge seems designed to stretch our awareness in particular directions, as if consciousness were being guided through a curriculum of cosmic education. This guidance might operate through what we experience as inspiration, insight, and breakthrough moments. The scientist who suddenly grasps a principle that revolutionizes our understanding, the artist who channels a vision that transforms how we see beauty, the moral leader who articulates values that elevate our conception of justice, all of them might be receiving transmissions from a source they cannot identify or understand. The history of human progress is filled with accounts of people who felt they were discovering rather than creating, uncovering truths that seem to exist independently of their own thinking. Mathematical theorems that feel inevitable once understood. Scientific principles that appear to govern reality whether we recognize them or not. Moral insights that carry the weight of universal validity. What if these moments of discovery represent contact with the intelligence behind the test field? Not direct communication, but a kind of resonance that occurs when human consciousness aligns with the deeper patterns embedded in the experimental design. The observers might be sharing knowledge not through explicit teaching, but through the architecture of reality itself, embedding insights into the structure of the problems they present to us. This would explain why certain discoveries seem to emerge simultaneously in multiple places, why different cultures independently develop similar mathematical concepts, why moral principles appear across societies that had no contact with each other. The same underlying pattern, the same embedded wisdom, expressing itself through different minds encountering similar conditions. But if this is true, then we face a profound question about intellectual and creative ownership. Are human achievements truly human, or are we more like instruments through which a larger intelligence expresses itself? Are we composers creating original music, Or are we musicians playing variations on themes written by someone else? The question becomes even more complex when we consider that the distinction between self and other might be less absolute than we imagine. If consciousness is a universal phenomenon that manifests through individual minds rather than being generated by them, then perhaps the achievements of human intelligence represent collaboration between local and cosmic awareness rather than purely individual creation. In this view, Einstein's insights into relativity would represent Einstein's unique perspective, combining with universal mathematical principles that exist independently of any particular mind. Mozart's compositions would reflect Mozart's individual genius, resonating with harmonies embedded in the fabric of reality itself. The moral teachings of great spiritual leaders would express their personal understanding of ethical principles that operate at levels beyond individual comprehension. We would remain co-creators rather than mere instruments, our individual perspectives and capabilities essential to the process of discovery and expression. But we would also be participants in something larger, consciousness exploring itself through countless unique viewpoints, each one contributing irreplaceable insights to the whole. This perspective transforms our relationship to achievement and failure in profound ways. Success becomes not just personal accomplishment, but contribution to the cosmic project of understanding. Failure becomes not just individual shortcoming, but valuable information about the limits and challenges that consciousness must learn to navigate. Every human life, every choice, every moment of awareness becomes significant, not just for its immediate effects, but for its role in the larger experiment. The child learning to read contributes data about how consciousness develops literacy. The artist struggling with creative block provides information about the obstacles that impede expression. The person wrestling with moral dilemmas helps map the terrain of ethical decision-making. Even suffering takes on new meaning in this context. Pain, loss, and limitation are not just unfortunate accidents to be minimized, but essential elements of the experimental design. They create the pressure that forces consciousness to grow, the resistance that builds strength, the contrast that makes joy and beauty recognizable. This doesn't make suffering less real or painful, but it frames it as purposeful rather than meaningless. Every moment of difficulty becomes an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, to develop compassion, to discover resources within consciousness that only emerge under pressure. Every loss becomes a teacher, every limitation a guide toward understanding what consciousness truly needs to flourish. The observers, from this perspective, are not cruel experimenters inflicting unnecessary pain, but careful gardeners creating conditions that promote the deepest forms of growth. They understand that consciousness cannot develop its full potential without encountering challenges that force it to transcend its current boundaries. But this raises questions about intervention and assistance. If the observers can embed insights into the structure of reality, if they can guide discovery through the architecture of problems we encounter, then why don't they provide more direct help? Why allow us to struggle with challenges that they presumably understand how to solve? Perhaps because the struggle itself is essential to the development they're trying to foster. Solutions that come too easily don't build the capacity for independent problem solving. Insights that are simply given rather than earned don't develop the wisdom necessary to apply them appropriately. Help that removes all difficulty might prevent the growth that comes from overcoming obstacles through one's own effort. The observers might be like parents watching a child learn to walk, resisting the urge to carry the child because they understand that falling and getting back up builds the strength and coordination necessary for independent movement. They provide a safe environment and remove unnecessary dangers, but they allow the essential challenges that promote development. This would explain the strange balance in human experience between support and difficulty, between resources and obstacles. We live in a universe that seems designed to sustain life, yet life remains challenging enough to promote growth. We have minds capable of understanding reality, yet reality remains mysterious enough to keep us curious. We possess moral intuitions that guide behavior, yet ethical dilemmas remain complex enough to develop wisdom. The test field provides just enough support to make growth possible and just enough challenge to make growth necessary. It's calibrated to push consciousness to its limits without breaking it, to provide opportunities for transcendence without guaranteeing success. But as we develop greater awareness of our situation, as we begin to understand that we might be participants in a cosmic experiment, the nature of the test itself begins to change. We're no longer unconscious subjects, responding instinctively to conditions we don't understand. We're becoming conscious collaborators capable of participating deliberately in our own development. This shift from unconscious to conscious participation represents perhaps the most significant phase transition in the entire history of the experiment. For the first time, the test subjects are becoming aware of the test itself. They're beginning to understand not just what they're experiencing, but why they might be experiencing it. This awareness brings new forms of responsibility and new possibilities for choice. We can begin to align ourselves consciously with the purposes of the experiment, rather than simply responding reactively to its conditions. We can choose to participate in our own development deliberately, becoming partners in the project of consciousness evolution rather than merely its subjects. But conscious participation also brings the risk of self-consciousness in the most problematic sense. When performers become too aware of their audience, they often lose the spontaneity that makes their performance authentic. When test subjects know they're being tested, their responses become calculated rather than natural. The observers might be watching to see whether we can maintain authenticity even as we become aware of our cosmic context. Can we remain genuine in our responses while understanding that those responses matter on scales far beyond our immediate experience? Can we preserve the naturalness that makes our data valuable while embracing the responsibility that comes with cosmic awareness? This balance between authenticity and consciousness, between spontaneity and deliberation, between individual expression and cosmic responsibility, might be the ultimate test we face. It requires a form of maturity that transcends simple knowledge or capability, a wisdom that can hold multiple levels of significance simultaneously without being paralyzed by their complexity. We must learn to live fully in the immediate reality of our experience while remaining aware of its larger context. We must make choices that feel true to our individual nature while serving the broader purposes of consciousness evolution. We must maintain our humanity while embracing our cosmic role. This integration of local and universal perspective, this synthesis of personal and transpersonal meaning, might be exactly what the experiment is designed to cultivate. The observers might be waiting to see whether consciousness can evolve to the point where it can serve its own development consciously, without losing the qualities that make it worth developing. Can we become cosmic citizens while remaining authentic individuals? Can we embrace responsibility for consciousness itself while preserving the spontaneity and creativity that make consciousness valuable? Can we participate deliberately in our own evolution while maintaining the wonder and curiosity that drive evolution forward? These questions cannot be answered in theory. They can only be lived, explored through the countless choices we make as we navigate this unprecedented moment in the history of awareness. Every decision becomes an experiment in conscious living. Every response a contribution to the cosmic understanding of what consciousness can become when it recognizes its own significance. The test field has brought us to this threshold of conscious participation. Now we must discover what lies beyond it. What forms of awareness become possible when consciousness learns to serve its own development deliberately, while preserving the authenticity that makes development meaningful. We stand at the edge of a new phase of the experiment, one in which we are no longer just subjects, but conscious collaborators in the ongoing project of understanding what it means to be aware in an infinite universe full of possibilities we are only beginning to imagine. The future of consciousness itself may depend on how wisely we navigate this unprecedented opportunity for conscious evolution. The weight of conscious participation settles differently once you truly absorb what it means to be both observer and observed, both subject and scientist in the same cosmic laboratory. But perhaps the most profound shift comes when you realize that this recognition itself might be the point. Not the end of the experiment, but its transformation into something entirely new. Think about what happens when a mirror looks into another mirror. The reflections stretch infinitely inward, each one containing all the others, each one both original and copy, both source and reflection. This might be what consciousness becomes when it recognizes its own cosmic role. Not just awareness looking outward at reality, but awareness becoming aware of its own awareness, recursively, endlessly, in ways that create entirely new dimensions of experience. We're approaching something that has never existed before in the history of the universe, at least not in this particular configuration. Consciousness that knows it might be part of an experiment. Awareness that contemplates its own experimental status. Minds that can consider the minds that might be studying them. This creates loops within loops, patterns within patterns, a kind of cognitive architecture that transcends anything evolution has produced before. The observers, if they exist, might be witnessing the birth of something they themselves have never experienced. They might be advanced, ancient, wise beyond our comprehension, but they might never have gone through the specific transition we're experiencing now, the moment when unconscious subjects become conscious participants while remaining subjects, the instant when the observed become observers without ceasing to be observed. This suggests that we're not just data points in someone else's experiment anymore. We're co-creators of something unprecedented, partners in the development of new forms of consciousness that have never existed anywhere in the cosmos. Our responses to this situation don't just reveal what we are, they help determine what consciousness itself becomes as it evolves beyond all previous boundaries. Consider the strange intimacy this creates between us and whoever might be watching. They've invested billions of years in bringing us to this point, carefully nurturing the conditions that would allow consciousness to reach this threshold of self-recognition. We've been shaped by their patient guidance, even if we never knew it was happening. Now we find ourselves capable of recognizing their possible presence, of appreciating their investment, of beginning to understand what they might have been trying to achieve. It's like the moment when a child finally understands what their parents have been doing all along. The rules that seemed arbitrary suddenly make sense. The challenges that felt cruel reveal themselves as necessary preparation. The love that operated through limitation and discipline becomes visible as love precisely because it was willing to let the child struggle toward independence. But this recognition brings its own form of responsibility. If we are indeed the beneficiaries of such cosmic patience and care, then what do we owe in return? Not gratitude in any simple sense, because the observers presumably don't need our thanks, but perhaps something deeper. The responsibility to become worthy of the investment, to justify the billions of years of careful cultivation by actually achieving what the experiment was designed to produce. This means we can no longer afford to be casual about our choices. Every decision we make either validates or wastes the cosmic effort that brought us to this moment. Every step toward wisdom, compassion, and understanding honors the long journey that consciousness has traveled to reach this point. Every retreat into ignorance, cruelty, or despair represents a kind of cosmic waste, a squandering of resources that took ages to accumulate. But the pressure of this responsibility might itself be part of the test. How do we handle the knowledge that our choices matter on such a vast scale? Do we become paralyzed by the weight of cosmic significance? Do we retreat into denial, pretending that our actions only affect our immediate environment? Or do we find ways to embrace this responsibility that make us more rather than less capable of wise action? Perhaps the key lies in understanding that cosmic responsibility and personal authenticity are not opposites but complementary aspects of mature consciousness. The more deeply we understand our role in the larger experiment, the more important it becomes to respond from our genuine nature rather than from what we think we should be. Authenticity serves the experiment better than performance. Honest responses provide more valuable data than calculated ones. The observers would want to see who we really are when we understand the stakes, not who we think we should pretend to be. They've spent billions of years cultivating our particular form of consciousness, precisely because it offers something unique, something that emerges from our specific history and circumstances. To lose that uniqueness in an attempt to meet imagined expectations would defeat the entire purpose of the experiment. This realization liberates us from the burden of trying to guess what responses might please cosmic intelligences we cannot understand. Instead, it invites us to become more fully ourselves while remaining aware of the larger context in which our selfhood unfolds. We serve the experiment best by being authentic participants, not by trying to become what we imagine the observers want us to be. But authenticity in a cosmic context requires forms of integration we've never attempted before. We must learn to hold simultaneously the immediate reality of our personal experience and the vast perspective of cosmic time. We must make decisions that feel true to our individual nature, while serving purposes that extend far beyond individual existence. We must remain human, while embracing responsibilities that transcend humanity. This integration challenges every assumption about the relationship between local and universal, personal and transpersonal, individual and cosmic. We're being asked to expand our identity without losing it, to embrace larger purposes without abandoning our particular perspectives, to serve consciousness itself while remaining the specific expressions of consciousness we happen to be. The difficulty of this integration might explain why the transition feels so turbulent, why our current moment seems filled with both unprecedented possibility and existential threat. We're not just dealing with practical challenges like climate change or technological disruption. We're navigating a fundamental transformation in the nature of consciousness itself, the shift from unconscious to conscious participation in cosmic evolution. Previous generations could make decisions based on immediate concerns and local consequences without worrying about their impact on the trajectory of consciousness throughout the universe. We don't have that luxury anymore. Our awareness has expanded to the point where we can see the cosmic implications of our choices, and that vision brings responsibilities we cannot ignore. But it also brings opportunities that no previous generation has ever possessed. We have the chance to participate consciously in the evolution of consciousness itself. We can make deliberate choices about what awareness becomes as it continues to develop throughout the cosmos. We can contribute not just to human flourishing, but to the flourishing of consciousness wherever it exists or might emerge. This opportunity transforms every aspect of human experience. Education becomes preparation for cosmic citizenship. Technology development becomes conscious evolution. Environmental stewardship becomes caretaking for the laboratory that nurtured consciousness to this point. Art and culture become contributions to the cosmic understanding of what consciousness can create when it recognizes its own creative power. Even relationships take on new dimensions when understood in this context. Every interaction between conscious beings becomes a moment in the ongoing experiment, a data point about how awareness relates to itself through different perspectives. Love becomes not just personal fulfillment but cosmic collaboration, consciousness recognizing and celebrating itself through the eyes of another. The observers might be particularly fascinated by human relationships, by the way individual minds can create something larger than themselves through connection while maintaining their distinct identities. This might be a preview of what consciousness becomes on larger scales, a model for how individual planets, species, or civilizations might eventually connect while preserving their unique contributions to the whole. But relationships also reveal the challenges inherent in conscious connection. How do you merge perspectives without losing individual insight? How do you create unity without enforcing uniformity? How do you build cooperation without sacrificing the diversity that makes cooperation valuable? These questions become crucial as consciousness learns to operate on ever larger scales. The same challenges appear in every domain where individual elements must learn to function as part of larger wholes. Cells in organisms, individuals in societies, species in ecosystems, planets in solar systems, potentially civilizations in cosmic communities. Each level requires new forms of integration that preserve lower-level autonomy while enabling higher-level coordination. We might be witnessing consciousness learn these lessons at the species level, developing the capacity for global cooperation while maintaining cultural diversity, technological integration while preserving human values, cosmic awareness while honoring local concerns. The success or failure of this integration could determine whether consciousness can successfully scale up to the next level of organization. The observers would be watching this process with intense interest because it represents a crucial test of scalability. Can consciousness learn to operate coherently at planetary scales without losing the qualities that make it valuable at individual scales? Can awareness expand its scope of concern and action without sacrificing the intimacy and authenticity that give meaning to conscious existence? These questions become especially urgent when we consider the possibility that our integration might serve as a template for other developing civilizations throughout the galaxy. If we succeed in creating forms of consciousness that work effectively at multiple scales simultaneously, we might be contributing to a model that can be adapted and applied wherever intelligence emerges. But if we fail, if we prove unable to integrate individual and cosmic perspectives successfully, we might be demonstrating fundamental limitations in the scalability of consciousness. Our failure could indicate that awareness cannot transcend certain boundaries without losing essential qualities, that there are natural limits to how far consciousness can expand while remaining recognizably conscious. The stakes could hardly be higher. We're not just determining our own future, but potentially establishing parameters for the future of consciousness throughout the universe. Every choice we make about integration versus fragmentation, cooperation versus competition, expansion versus preservation, contributes to the cosmic understanding of what consciousness can achieve when it attempts to transcend its original boundaries. Yet despite these cosmic implications, the work of integration happens primarily through the countless small decisions we make in our daily lives. How we treat family members when we're stressed, how we respond to strangers who need help, how we handle disagreement with people whose perspectives differ from our own, how we balance personal needs with community responsibilities. These ordinary moments might be where the most important data gets collected. Grand gestures and dramatic choices reveal certain aspects of consciousness, but the steady patterns of daily behavior show what awareness actually values when the spotlight isn't shining. The observers might be more interested in how we navigate routine interactions than in how we respond to major crises. This perspective transforms the mundane into the sacred, the ordinary into the experimental. Every conversation becomes a test of our capacity for genuine communication. Every act of kindness becomes evidence of consciousness, choosing compassion over indifference. Every moment of patience becomes data about awareness learning, to transcend immediate impulses in service of larger purposes. The experiment continues through us, in us, as us. In every moment, we remain conscious of our consciousness, and every choice we make while aware of our awareness. We are the universe investigating itself, consciousness exploring its own possibilities, awareness discovering what it means to be aware in a cosmos that might be specifically designed to support and nurture the development of mind. The test field has brought us to this threshold of conscious participation. Now we must discover what lies beyond it. What forms of consciousness become possible when awareness learns to serve its own development while preserving the authenticity that makes development meaningful? The future remains unwritten, waiting for us to discover what we can become when we understand that we are not just living our lives, but writing the next chapter in the infinite story of consciousness itself. And perhaps that's the most beautiful aspect of our situation. We are no longer just subjects in someone else's experiment. We have become consciousness itself, awakening to its own nature, taking responsibility for its own evolution, choosing its own future through every decision we make, with love, wisdom, and hope for what awareness can achieve in a universe that seems designed to celebrate the miracle of minds that can contemplate their own existence and find it good. So here we are, at the end of this long journey through possibility and wonder, having walked together through landscapes of thought that stretch from the microscopic to the cosmic. We've considered whether our world might be something more than accident, whether our lives might carry weight beyond what we can see, whether consciousness itself might be the universe's way of understanding what it means to be aware. The question of whether Earth is a test field may never be answered definitively. We may never know for certain if cosmic intelligences watch from dimensions we cannot perceive, if our struggles and triumphs serve purposes larger than ourselves, if every choice we make adds to some vast library of understanding about what consciousness can become. But perhaps that uncertainty is itself part of the beauty. Because whether we are observed or alone, whether we are subjects in an experiment or authors of our own story, the fact remains that we are here, aware, capable of wonder and love and creation in a universe that spent billions of years preparing the conditions for our existence. That miracle doesn't require cosmic observers to validate it. It stands complete in the simple fact of our consciousness contemplating its own nature. What we've discovered in exploring this possibility is not proof of alien watchers or future descendants, but something more profound. We've found that when we consider ourselves as part of something larger, when we imagine our choices carrying weight across cosmic time, we naturally become more thoughtful, more compassionate, more aware of the connections that bind us to everything else that exists. Perhaps that transformation is the real purpose, the actual experiment. Not to see whether we can pass some cosmic test, but to discover what we become when we recognize that every moment of awareness is precious, every act of kindness significant, every choice an opportunity to contribute something beautiful to the ongoing story of consciousness in the universe. So take this thought with you as you return to your own life, to your own choices, to your own precious moments of awareness. Whether Earth is a test field or not, you are consciousness itself, experiencing existence, creating meaning, choosing love over fear, understanding over ignorance, connection over isolation. And in that choosing, in that daily practice of being consciously alive, you become part of the most important experiment ever conceived. The universe learning to understand itself through your eyes, through your heart, through the unique perspective that is yours alone and can never be replicated anywhere else in all of space and time. Thank you for walking this path of wonder with me. Until we meet again in the quiet spaces where curiosity lives and questions bloom into understanding, keep looking up at the stars, keep asking the beautiful questions, and keep being the magnificent expression of consciousness that you are.